Hello and welcome to There's No Business Like, a podcast where friends and industry colleagues explore topics and interview leaders in our industry of professional theatrical touring. Hello, and welcome back to There's No Business Like. I'm Danielle from the Alden and McLean, Virginia, and I'm here with my friends, Brian.
Hey, Danielle. Brian Zelmer from KU Presents in Kutztown, Pennsylvania.
Kevin.
Kevin Maynard, Quad City Arts, splitting the border between Iowa and Illinois.
Katie.
Hi, everyone. Katie Miller with Michigan Maven Creative Associates in Midland, Michigan.
And Josh.
Josh Benson, rocking it from Marion, Illinois at the Marion Cultural and Civic Center.
All right. Well, let's have some fun this morning. Can we do that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's do it.
We have a special episode for everybody today. We're going to be talking about conferencing. We have just had the fine honor of attending both the WA annual conference as well as the MAX conference. And in addition to, I was actually thinking about it this morning, and we've been to 2 APAPs together, 2 MAXs together, an OAPN, and a WA. And for anybody not in the industry, that sounded like a wild statement.
It also sounds like the start of a great joke. So.
Unfortunately, maybe, who knows? Maybe by the end of this episode, it will be.
Joke.
And then, of course, like prior to that, you know, on our own, we Arts Midwest, plenty of APAPs kind of between us. And this past couple of years, a lot of conversation in the field about what is conferencing now? What do we need it to be? Are there changes that need to be made? How do we move forward with them? And since everything was so fresh for us, we decided to forego interviews this week and just chat about what conferencing is right now and what we see in the future. So I want to just kick it over to Brian and Kevin. Could you guys give us an overview of what we saw at WA this year?
Yeah, I think first we should start out that WA is the Western Arts Alliance. It is one of the regional conferences that covers the Western states. This year's was hosted in San Diego at a nice little resort, and I'll let Brian take it from there.
Yeah, Kevin, I thought it was pretty nice. For those of you who didn't attend, we actually had the pleasure and opportunity to try something new for us. And that was we created a morning show for the conference attendees using video technology that Josh brought all of this amazing equipment to San Diego with us. And that was my weather report every day. They just had me saying it's pretty nice because the weather there was amazing. Besides that, we kind of had, everyone called it the summer camp atmosphere the art summer camp, because it was such a relaxed kind of setting and just was so conducive to just hanging out and getting to know people. Of course, they had amazing professional development and showcases and all sorts of things, forums, a lot of great learning opportunities there and meeting. But the meeting of the people is always the important part to me. And I just thought the setting was so conducive to that.
Absolutely. And obviously there was also the expo hall and, plenty of networking events and, a closing party that happened to have a water slide. So, which is a pretty unique endeavor.
And for the record, the resort had a water slide the entire time.
Oh, yeah, that's true, too.
Which Josh took full advantage of, let us know.
Did.
All right. So Art Summer Camp at WA. What about Max? Katie, Josh, give us a rundown of that event.
Yeah. So the Midwest Arts Expo, or MAX, is in its second year. So Arts Midwest folded their conference after the pandemic for a variety of reasons. OAPN, Ohio Arts Professionals Network, hosted sort of like an interim conference, expanded their conference in 2022 to sort of meet the need of the Midwest community, which was fantastic. And they did a great job. And then Midwest Arts Expo came out of this need to have a Midwest regional conference. Heartland Performing Arts is a nonprofit that was formed to host this conference. It is not a membership conference. And Heartland Performing Arts is not a membership organization. The sole focus is producing this conference for presenters, agents, and artists in the industry that are Midwest based, but it's also open to folks that are not a part of the Midwest. And so it kicked off last year in 2023 in Indianapolis and was hosted again in Indianapolis this year. And next year in 2025, we'll be moving to Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
To this being the second MAX conference, the first year with MAX, there was a ton of energy because it was all brand new and people were excited to be coming back together under the umbrella of a new Midwest organization. This year didn't necessarily have that exact same energy, but nonetheless, it was still a very busy, vibrant conference. And format-wise, they split things up really well. It's essentially morning PD, afternoon expo, and evening showcases. That's as simple as we can break down that. But they have everything at different times, so that nothing's overlapping, so that you don't actually have to choose between what types of things you're doing.
Yeah, awesome. So thanks, guys. So as I think everybody can hear, this episode, we're going to have a lot of stuff to celebrate. A lot of things that happened at these fall conferences that we were at this year was amazing. But I do also want to note that, like, while we're celebrating, we also are probably going to have some critical things to say about the different conferences or the events. But critical doesn't mean that something was bad. It doesn't mean that something was wrong. But I think for especially conferencing and for these two groups that are producing these things, we have so much respect for them. And, you know, when you respect something, you want it to grow and to be better. All right, so guys, let's hop into it. We're going to start with just sort of like the thing at the top, diving into a conference, the vibes. Uh, so what do you feel like was the overall vibes? Has there been a vibe shift? You know, and what do we think that we want conferences to just kind of feel like overall?
So with WA, it was pretty unique being within the resort setting. But in addition to that, to kind of set the vibe, they brought us in as conference commentators as part of the overall vibe of the conference. And part of that is to bring the fun and to make people start their mornings with a fun thing to set the tone for the day. And so between the casual atmosphere of a resort and us attempting to bring the fun all throughout while we were there, I think it created a really unique atmosphere for a conference. One that, like Brian said, facilitated conversation, facilitated networking.
I think beyond networking, it was facilitating relationship building too. It was not just meeting people and getting a business card like some, and there's nothing wrong with that, but that's a different type of vibe. I think the fact that we were able to spend quality time with each other and really get to know our colleagues, I think it just helps us like really build that relationship.
I think the dress code at WA actually really helped with that conference vibe. Yes, it's the resort. Yes, it's, you know, tons of sunshine, which we kept hearing over and over from people. It is so good to just be outside and in the sun and have fresh air. But they were very specific about the dress code for the conference, which was hats and flats, right? Sort of really leaning into that. And I do think one of the takeaways we've been hearing from colleagues, we've been talking to them since then, is like, not having to wear a blazer or a business suit or that sort of thing really lended to this relationship building, and sense that like we can do business while feeling comfortable and expressing ourselves through our clothing, I think in a slightly different way, helping with that relationship building. And I think that's sort of like where the world has been headed since the pandemic, right? People just dress a little bit more casually. They're looking to focus not so much on the formality of relationships, but really the intentionality behind relationships. And Max, I think, feels a little bit less formal as well. People are still a little bit more dressed up, but because of how Josh mentioned the schedule is, people can sort of segment their day and they don't feel as rushed. So I think the dress code of WA, and then is that one of the things we can rethink and learn and carry forward, is like, do we all have to be wearing formal business wear to conduct these conversations and build these relationships? Maybe not. Maybe it's something to think about.
The question is, will that carry forward with it not being at a resort next year?
Right. Is this lightning in a bottle, right?
Yeah. Is that something that will change based on the location and format? Because it will be in LA next year at LA Live, and that's going to have a different feel to it. And in turn, that's going to come along with people aren't going to dress in resort wear because they're not at a resort any longer.
Yeah, I think WA really did a great job of using the environment that they had. I mean, putting some juried showcases outside, being able to do a lot of the networking events outside. And I think, you know, if WA in the future, or Max, or any sort of conference has an opportunity to take advantage of outside spaces, like, I would obviously encourage it. I would also say that obviously the Midwest, and when you put APAP in January in New York, makes that a bit challenging or sort of, questionable. Well, you sort of never know what that weather's going to be like.
WA and Max were the first regional conferences and events that I went to. And I think the thing that both of them do differently than what APAP does is that everything is so close together. At WA, it was hyper close together, but it eliminates so much of just the travel time and the ability to be like, hey, we're having this conversation and it's now a meal time. Do you want to go grab lunch somewhere? And you can get lunch in an hour easily and then get back to where you need to go. And, just coming from an APAP only kind of experience, like that is trickier. It's not impossible in New York, but if you're trying to do a showcase, downtown, and then you've got, lunch plans in Midtown, you got to factor that in or you're going to be late. And to me, that really changes the vibe of the amount that I'm able to accomplish, but then also just like the depth of conversation that I can have.
One of the things that I really enjoyed about Max is, like Josh said, that everything was really segmented and split up so that if you wanted to focus on PD, you could focus on PD. If you wanted to focus on showcasing, you could focus on showcasing. I think what I really liked about that is it created a bit of a more relaxed schedule. And anytime that I felt rushed, like that was on me for, trying to pack in too many meetings at one time. It wasn't necessarily the conference schedule itself. And so I think that helps create a sort of relaxed environment. And I think that they did that really well this year.
I want to switch us over to professional development. Professional development is a huge part of these conferences. And I think we really saw that this fall at Max and at WA.
Because I didn't get to attend Max this year, I'm going to just quickly mention WA. Katie and I both got invited to the Conexiones reception, and we got to meet a lot of colleagues that don't attend usually APAP and other things, and that was really special for me. And seeing that track that WA does, and in fact, we didn't talk about it before, but they're actually they just had this week a virtual conference. WA did, so they're doing that with a Conexiones track included in that. So
that was a specific professional development track that focused on relationship building across the US-Mexico border. And so folks were able to go to Tijuana for a day, sort of as a pre-conference event to experience conversation and cultural learning in Tijuana. And then there were specific sessions sort of dedicated to exploring those relationships and Latin artists and programming opportunities during the course of the conference. And Brian and I were able to attend one of those, the reception for folks. And it was striking to us because we have not really seen that sort of very focused professional development, I think, in the past with a very specific lens on it at other conferences. So that was interesting to see and sort of refreshing too, because it's was embedded sort of in showcases and the PD and the networking and gathering spaces. So I think that is something to think about in terms of theming professional development or picking a focus lens that people can really engage around during their time at a conference. It doesn't have to be necessarily that, of course, but I think that's like something that we could think about more in depth as we move forward and sort of rethink the future of conferencing. I have been reflecting a lot on all of my conference experiences, and coming out of these two, I'm sort of going like, what is PD supposed to do and what do we want from it, both as individuals and as like a wider field? So I think PD, this is just me, PD is supposed to teach us something new. It's also supposed to support us in our jobs, right? So giving us actual real information and takeaways that we can implement when we get back to our real lives outside of conferencing. And I think it's also supposed to raise dialogue about the most important issues of the day and give us new ways to understand and think about them, and also create connections through conversation. So we see PD in a variety of different formats. That can be keynotes, it can be plenaries, it can be roundtable conversations around a particular topic within an affinity group space. It can be sort of panel discussions with Q&A. There's a variety of different formats, but I think at its core, those are the things that PD is supposed to do or what we want it to do. Sometimes PD affirms what we know already, and that's great. Like, yes, I'm on the right track. This programming arm that I'm trying out, other people are going down the same same track and we can compare notes. I think that's great. Sometimes it gives you necessary information to bring home. It opens up something new, teaches you something, brings you great information to bring home to your colleagues, and some ideas of new things you can implement. And sometimes it really can change your perspective and shift your perspective and teach you something brand new. And I think there's a lot of value in that as well. So I think there's definitely a need for kind of 101 level PD for folks that are new to the field, that are looking for the basics of how to do their jobs or have questions about things they've experienced as they've come into their roles across a variety of different dimensions of our industry. So I think that's absolutely necessary. But only offering that sort of PD is not enough at this point in time because we are dealing with bigger issues. So I sort of think about that as the nuts and bolts, right? So those are sessions that we probably should be offering in some way, shape, or form at every single conference. So for instance, Kevin Spencer does a session about sensory inclusive programming or relaxed programming. I experienced that for the first time in 2018, and it was world changing for me. I had some basic knowledge. I'd been introduced to these ideas, but that gave me such a firm foundation that I was able to go back to my venue and implement programming that year. And it gave me the confidence to just like learn a little bit more. And then I was off and running. And that's something that a lot of people are still sort of uncertain about. And that's an example of something that could be offered every single year because you're always going to have new people that need to learn that sort of programming area, whether you're an agent, an artist, or a presenter. But then there's also like these really big issues that are maybe more situated for keynotes and plenaries. So we should be bringing in heavy hitters. We should be looking at data, addressing the most important moments or issues of the day, and also looking for those moments of inspiration. So I'm also thinking about like, how do we do fewer sessions, but with maybe more attendees in the room? So because there's so many PD sessions sometimes that you maybe are getting 12 to 30 people in the room. And that intimate conversation can be really useful, but what if we thought about PD as like bigger groups of people having bigger conversations? And what if we were all hearing the same information at the same time and really sort of looked at things field wide versus at our individual venues? Like where is the balance in that? And what would that do if we all got to hear the same thing and we all walked away having the same conversation on 4 topics instead of 20 topics? What would that do for us in terms of being able to build better solutions to our bigger issues?
That's also assuming that there would be enough interest in those topics to garner the more people in the room. Like that's not taking down to fewer topics won't necessarily focus all the same people into one room that were spread out amongst rooms, just because the ones that people are attending are because those are the ones that attracted them from an ideological standpoint.
And I have to also just interject that not everybody learns in the same way. And I know I personally actually get the ones that I've grown the most personally has been actually the small sessions where we can actually have more one-on-one dialogue or small group dialogue.
Using Max as an example, and I don't want to like be overly critical of them, but every day there were 3 to 4 PD sessions happening at the exact same time. And every time, and this again typically happens with Max, at least for me, is there is always like 1 or 2 days that I feel are like stacked, that have like, here's the things that I want to see. And I'm like, I can't possibly get to, 3 sessions that are happening at the exact same time. But if they were, laid out a bit differently, or if there were less topics happening, or if they were labeled in a way that's like, this is a 101 session, this is a 201 session, so that you can sort of choose that track versus
I like that idea.
Sometimes they have tracks where it's like, oh, this is an executive director track, or this is this sort of track. But like what I want is, something that's not, I mean, sometimes it's like, oh, if you're in fundraising, like this is a good one for you. What I want is like, is this a 101 or is this a 401?
Right. Because people that have been in the field for 8 or less years need something different than people that have been in the field for 20 plus years. And I think those bigger issues, we need to be funneling people that have been in the field for a long time, that have the experience, into whether they're affinity groups or problem solving rooms, or I don't know what you call them, but like, how do we take the opportunity when we are all gathered in one space to like put these brains in one room and really start to dig into the big issues?
And so a trend that I've seen at some conferences like over the past like 2 years or so is the idea of having a session where there's maybe a panel or a speaker or some kind of guided conversation on a specific topic. And specifically, a lot of times this is happening in the TYA space. So at Max, it was TYA space talking about commissioning, and especially in that genre, what commissioning looks like in different places. And so there was a panel that kind of did a deep dive, and then there were people in the audience that knew they were going to get called on to just share like a glimmer of what it was that they were doing. And then it kind of gave us an opportunity to ask questions like amongst each other, so that it wasn't just like a panel of experts and a room full of people learning. Like we knew that there were people within the audience that also had different points of view. And, there's not necessarily a, one or two people that are like the experts in TYA commissions, so that it kind of sets the stage for more conversations to happen after. And, when we went then into a showcase, and a lot of us were seated at tables naturally, and those conversations kept going, not necessarily formally, but it really kind of gave us a stage to talk about what problems or what we see in our own work, and to brainstorm with people around us. And so, I think that there's a merging of a lot of these different formats and reasonings that can fit in the future. Um, and sort of as we're talking about all of this, I feel like we see so much that change is inevitable, that we want different things. And we're all Gen Xers and millennials, which is a different group of people that's been attending these conferences. And so we we're just 5 people, but a lot of the stuff we're hearing from our colleagues as well, of just what is it about these events that we can rethink for those of us that are kind of moving into it, and pave a slightly different route for those that come behind us. And I don't think that change necessarily means like polar opposite, but we don't keep doing things the same way just because they're the way that we always do them. And so I wanted to mention that before we talk about the expo hall. And that's a place that costs a lot more for agents to attend, like for conference presenters, like per square foot, very expensive. So it's a huge part of what we're all paying for. And like, what is it that we, the people here now and the people in the future, need to get out of that space?
I got to go into the expo hall of WA and interview people. And in talking, because I had gone to WA years ago when it was in Seattle, and the energy and the vibe in the expo hall then was so much different than it was at San Diego. And so I was asking a lot of especially the people, the exhibitors that have gone many years, and just wondering how it compared, how it tracked, over time. And they said this was one of the busiest expo halls that they've had at WA, and like the most discovery, because most of the times the history, like most people at WA, presenters wise, would just do meetings. They'd go to where their meeting was, their expo booth, and then leave the hall and not wander around. And this year they saw a lot of people wandering around and discovering. And then on my time off, when we were done videoing, I actually got to wander the hall too. And I don't usually start my planning process that early, but because of some of the conversations I had in that hall, it actually got me already thinking and starting the planning process sooner for KU Presents, because of the exciting things that were happening there. So that's just some anecdotal information about WA's booths.
So I think the expo hall's an interesting concept, but at the same time, it's flawed in many ways in the way that it currently functions, because it creates an offset, imbalanced power dynamic purely by the way that it's set up, by all of the exhibitors being isolated to just their booths, and then the presenters or other attendees being able to walk freely and approach the booth. The power dynamic is shifted to the presenter purely by the psychological outlay of the format itself. I don't know that there's a way to fix that, but that is one inherent flaw in the way that Expo Hall exists currently.
The buyer always has power. Like, think about it in any kind of buying, selling kind of situation. But I don't think it's about power in the expo hall. It's about discovery. Showcases and expo hall for me is about discovery, because especially now in this age where we use Zoom and other, I've built relationships over 20 years of being in this industry. So I can do a lot of the business from my office and, where I'm booking shows or learning about shows and things. But that's with people I know. Like, what I love about the expo hall is I get to wander around and make time to discover people I don't know, and artists and touring groups that I don't know, which I wouldn't have if I didn't wander by their booth. Like, I don't know of another opportunity like that in the industry to have that discovery.
So AIBA does Expo Hall completely differently. They do so with the hours set for Expo Hall at Midwest and WA, there's so much time in there that they use it for scheduled meetings primarily, much more than discovery. At AIBA, it is set up in a way that there's literally 3 hours of time, and that's it. It is on one day. People do not take meetings during that Expo Hall time, or during and there they call it Agents Alley, but they don't take meetings during that time. That time is purely discovery. And it is a handshake, a connection, exchange of a business card, and you're moving on. Or you're hearing about roster really quick or looking at their materials, but it is not set up in a way where everybody's locked into their booth time for X amount of hours for 3 days in a row. And it creates a very different feel and format. It literally feels like more of a discovery marketplace because you're not there having meetings. Because meetings and sitting down in the booth changes the feel and format of it. Everybody on their feet and moving around the entire time creates something completely different.
That's interesting. I didn't know that. It's like almost feels like an on your own sort of like speed dating model.
That's interesting. That might be an interesting way to consider like condensing some of that. Because like Danielle said, one of the conversations that, we hear and we've talked about is how massive the expo hall is, and just how many hours we're spending in there, which is what, sort of helps. I'm going to say drives up the cost, but does drive up the cost of running a conference. And so if there's a way to condense that, or maybe run that slightly differently, that would be interesting to experiment with.
And I also appreciate sort of the efficiency that having the agents in the booth and being able to set the meetings kind of gives me. It gives me a chance to have a day or, a couple of hours set aside to go through and to get all of sort of the baseline information that I'm going to start planning my season with. Certainly not all. And, I'm going to kind of keep going to APAB and I'm going to keep taking Zoom meetings and things. But like to get a lot of information in a really short period of time about like who's touring, when are they touring, about how much is it going to cost? Like, am I anywhere near a route that's already being planned? Or if I wanted that, is it looking right now like it's going to be a one-off? Like, does this thing that I'm excited about fit in my space? Sort of these really nuts and bolts kind of things about planning the upcoming season so that I kind of feel like I have a foundation to be working from, and that I can make my own plan about what it is that I want to follow up on sort of immediately, maybe long-term follow up on. And, if there are people that reach out to me that are like, hey, we didn't get a meeting, like, can we chat now? I'm like, yes, please, like, let's do it. But for me, like with all of the other things that I do in my organization, getting that opportunity to just like get it all in one day saves me, I think, a ton of time and like just a lot of effort in like how I schedule my time in the fall with everything else. And a change too that I've also started to see in the expo hall is people printing out less, people handing out less of more of like a slim brochure or a postcard that's sort of just got the overview of their roster.
I used to have to bring a whole extra suitcase just to bring the stuff I would get home. So now I don't have to do that, which is wonderful. And it saves the planet.
Exactly. Yeah. And people have like such great websites now that have so much of the information we need, and it's copy and pastable. It has always driven me up a wall when somebody prints out the internet for me. And I want just something beautiful that I can write on. And that's a key too, as I've seen a lot of people giving me things that aren't glossy and then have more white space on it. And thank you to those people that are just allowing me to take the notes just like in real time and like appreciating the fact that we're just talking about business right now. And then eventually I'm going to see you at a showcase later and we're going to hang out. But like right now, here's what it is. Please and thank you.
I also like, to your point about scheduling, Danielle, I think, and going back to the number of hours of the expo hall, I actually, I hit a wall. I'll go in there and I'll hit a wall because it's so big, especially at APAP. And so I like the ability to then say, okay, I've hit my wall. Let me go leave, get recharged, rest, do whatever. And then I know I have other times to come back. Whereas if it was all in just, okay, this is it, this one day, I don't know that in the big conferences like APAP that I'd be able to handle that, because my brain just gets overstimulated at some point and I just need to take a break.
So something that I'm keenly interested in is showcases. So I want to move our discussion right now over to showcases. And I'm just going to give you kind of my big feelings about this, and then you guys can reflect as well. But for me, showcases is probably the second reason I go to conferences. I want to be able to see the work. And I think that I have a sort of a professional expertise to be able to see something in a hotel room, understand that it's a piece of it, or that I'm going to see different pieces of a show, and then I can fill in the gaps, and that I can get the video later, or that I can look at the writer and understand the show that I'm getting. I think that the short, segments of a show definitely work for a lot of artists, and it gives you the opportunity to see like 6 different things in an hour. Again, it's efficiency of time because we're not getting a ton of time at these things. And as much as I love a good showcase until midnight, I just can't do that 4 nights a week, right? So I think my biggest thing about all of these is like hardcore efficiency. But I think what's missing is that there are a lot of artists that don't showcase well. There's a lot of art forms that don't showcase well in a hotel, on that 10 by 10 stage. And I think it's largely music artists that do showcase well. And I think there are conference producers that do insanely good jobs turning those rooms that are like stagnant conference rooms into something that like really feels like a performing arts center that I can like see these bands in. But I think if you walked into a lot of the conferences that have been in the past 2 years, you would think that our industry largely books tribute bands, which I don't have a problem with. I love. I've changed my feelings on those to an extent, and magicians, right? And there's so much more than that. The APAP kind of version is so big, right? But I think that we need to think about partnering with theaters or getting some other kind of performance space into these conferences that allow more genres to participate. Um, you know, and because there's not necessarily space that really exemplifies a lot of dance, a lot of theater, I think we miss that. And so it makes it hard for our booking cycle. But I also think it's uncentering the artist from this experience. And the more ways that these conferences in the future, I think, can really bring back to centering the artists, I think that is going to really help move us forward.
So we're talking about the cost of the expo hall. The cost of showcasing is enormous, and it's only gone up and up and up. And I don't know how they can showcase in this day and age. And I agree. I like tribute bands. I haven't in the last several years booked them in this venue. We're just getting into that. We're changing, like you said. But it's like I don't want to see 10 different Motown groups, doing the same set list essentially in the same night. That's not helpful for anybody. And unfortunately, it goes again to the cost of what they can do. There was great theater. There was every genre when I first started going. I remember, and a lot of it, you have to take the initiative as a presenter to go off campus sometimes, quote unquote. You have to look at the showcase list and see what's playing where, but it has become more homogenous because of these expenses and what type of acts can afford to go there and bring their show to New York and showcase during the conference.
And there's also logistics of setting up a theatrical show for a 15-minute showcase. Like that, it's not reality for a 15-minute showcase. Like for theater stuff, you've got to go and watch an entire show.
In discussing this prior to our conversation with Danielle, I was thinking back to iPay 2020. It's the only iPay I got to go to before the pandemic and before that conference shuttered as well. But the way that they structured that was you were put into groups. So you were in Group A, and Group A followed a specific trail of showcases. And they worked with it, sat down in Philadelphia because they had access to multiple theater spaces within 6 or 7 blocks, right? And they scheduled your day for you. So you got to see 20 to 40 to almost 50-minute showcases. So you got to see almost a full version of these shows in almost full production. So like I saw Doodle Pop, for instance. I saw the whole show when I went to that iPay, and it was incredibly valuable. It gave the artist a lot more bang for their buck, and your day wasn't overly scheduled. I think it's interesting to think about if we're there to see work, and this is the one time presenters get to spend money going somewhere, right? Like I could drive around Michigan 16 different weekends out of the year and see a bunch of different shows. That's not nearly as efficient as seeing like those 16 different things all in 1 week in Indianapolis or in New York, right? So it's like thinking about the not only the money, but also the time, right? And sort of like, how do you condense things so you get the biggest bang for your buck on both sides of that equation? I don't think we have any solutions necessarily, but like, what are good things from past conferences or other models that we could take with us moving forward?
And so, I think there lots of different groups of people kind of get together and they talk about like what they want to see in these and what did work for them and what didn't work for them. And I think, like, honestly, I think that it's a sign that like we need these conferences. We love them, and we want them to grow and to grow into the future. And that's really sort of the discussion we just wanted to let you all in on today. Is sort of like our initial takeaways of what this is, and it's we did not agree in the vast majority of this conversation, and like I always say, like the podcast works because like we're people from like different places. We met each other and it was just like our values aligned, right? Like us, the 5 of us, like that's sort of my soapbox on like why I love you guys, and why I choose to spend so much of my time with you. And so even us wonderful podcasters, pod family, can vehemently disagree on sort of what we think showcases should be, what we think expo hall should be. But like we're going to keep working, and we're going to keep helping bring these things into the future, and because they need to be able to work for everyone, right? And I hope that everybody listening to this is kind of thinking about their own perception of what was great and what wasn't great. And I would say that a lot of these people who plan these conferences will take those suggestions, right? Nobody wants just criticism for criticism's sake. Like, don't do that. That's terrible. But like, if you have a genuine suggestion that you think would help people, like tell them.
And if you want to get involved, tell them too. Yeah, because they all need help
use the hands
and want help.
Yeah, because that's the other thing too, is
is
there's a lot of ideas and there's limited resources. And that's really a part of the conversation I don't think we got into today. And so then one last thing before we wrap up. We just, in the course of about 3 to 4 weeks, we went to 2 conferences, and we spent a lot of time getting to know our listeners and getting to know more people in the industry. I've probably been introduced to like hundreds of people in the last 2 weeks that I didn't know beforehand. And, these conferences in this industry, like we say it so much, is about the people and the people that are in it. And I just wanted to say a big thank you to everyone who came up to us and told us like what you liked about the pod and like what you didn't like about it. Like, I really appreciate everyone's frankness. And I especially appreciate the like 4 people that came up to Kevin and more or less told him that I was the funny one, because I was so thankful to know that my specific brand of dumb jokes works for 4 of you. So thank you for that.
Like Danielle said, we've gone to 2 conferences in the past 3 weeks, and having done that and having been more involved with both of those conferences through what we're doing here, I just want to say that I do have a lot of love and respect for those folks who are putting this on, because it is a lot of work, and it is exhausting work because of the hours that goes into it and because of the attention to detail that they are putting towards that. So I know that there are some things that we have been critical on in this, but like Danielle said at the beginning, like we're critical because we love it and because we wanted to see it grow better. And like Brian's pointed out, this isn't something that, we're saying that we have all the answers and that we're right. Like, this is just, for me, it's one person's opinion on some certain things. But overall, I want to be very clear that they, being those organizers, have done an incredible job and have a lot of respect for them and everything that they're doing.
And I think it only confirms the need to gather, right? We've been having these conversations about, do we really need to gather? We absolutely do. The energy is palpable, and the relationships are so valuable that you build when you get to meet in person. So we need to keep conferencing.
Amen. We can all agree on that one.
Yeah, there's so many amazing people in this field. Keep going. Don't stop. The work we're doing is important. We love you, and we can't wait to see you. All right, everyone. Thanks for listening to There's No Business Like. Our producers and hosts are Brian Zelmer, Josh Benson, Kevin Maynard, Katie Miller, and me, Danielle Van Hook. Views expressed in this podcast are ours alone and are not reflective of the organizations we are a part of. Keep up with us at nobusinesslike.com. There you'll find links to all of our episodes and socials. If you like this podcast, give us a like, a follow, a review, or our favorite, a 5-star rating. Oh wait, what was that site? I got it, don't worry. It is nobusinesslike.com. Do I sound out bus-I-ness every time I type it? Yep, sure do. Stay in touch, my friends. Oh God.
Ooh. Danielle is dying on the eye. This could be good for ratings.
Oh, no.
Keep going, Danielle. I just want to go back real quick to Katie mentioned what Midwest Arts Expo MAX stands for, which the last word is Expo. And so many people say, oh, I went to the MAX Expo. So they're saying Expo. Anyway.
So glad you got that in there, Brian.
Good thing we cut Danielle off.
Does anybody else have any things we need to say before I do a real done?
Yeah, I want to thank the Max Expo for putting everything together.
I would like to thank the Midwest Max Expo.